So someone mentioned Crystar in a comment, so I figured that was an awesome jumping off point to take a look at some of the Misfit toys from the 80s. Things that a lot of us who grew up then might have memories of, like fragmented memories of, but we don't really know what the name of the toy was, but it was there, whether it was in our toy bins or friends. First up, I do have Crystar himself, the Crystal Warrior. These were a line of translucent figures by Remco, and they were promoted through a Marvel comic book series, technically called The Saga of Crystar, the Crystal Warrior. Next up, we have Air Raiders. These were a line of vehicles whose gimmick was an air pump that fired the missiles. And I feel like everybody had some of these little pilot figures back as kids. I had them. I didn't know what the hell they went with. It wasn't until I became an adult and did some research that I found they went with these guys. Eagle Force. These were a line of 2 3/4 inch figures that were completely die cast. These are heavy. Not functional really as toys. They have 4 points of articulation, but they scale perfectly with mask figures. I know most people think that GoBots are the bargain bin version of Transformers, but actually these guys were. These are called converters. They're by a company called Select, and they were like the cheapest price point transforming robots of the 80s. But they look pretty cool. Look, they had a peacock robot. These guys were pretty neat. These are called Parasites by Matchbox, and they combined like a transforming gimmick with kind of like a Matchbox Hot Wheels toy. Inside a little vehicle you had transforming alien robots. I don't know how common this next one is, but I had this guy as a kid, and I loved him. This is a little robot by Tomy, and he went by 2 names, I think, either just My Robot or Dingbot. And he was motorized. You would turn him on, he would walk around and spin his head around. Manglors were an infamous toy line from the 80s because they were figures made of a weird-ass material, and they were marketed as figures that you could stretch, you could bend, and you could literally rip apart and then stick them back together. I remember the toy commercials for this, had to have one as a kid, got one, but learned what other kids did the hard way, which was they don't really stick back together very well. So the company Ideal that made them caught a lot of heat from pissed off parents because they were purchasing toys that their kids were destroying immediately. This was their weird ass play set. Part 2 of Misfit toys from the 80s. To recap, these are things that you might have hazy, fleeting memories of, but they're not figures with clear-cut names or origins. You don't know if they went to a cartoon or a comic or what. They were just sort of there in your childhood. First up, we have Power Lords. This was a line of toys put out by Revell, the company that's most known for making model kits. And these were toys that were cross-marketed with a comic book series by DC. This is the hero of the line. This is Atom Power. And this is a weird figure because it's both the main character and like the superhero that he becomes in one. You hit a button and he flips around. That's really odd. That still looks strange to me today. And this guy's name is Psydot. And if you've ever seen this figure as a kid, you probably remember him. You never knew his name, but you don't forget seeing something that looks like this. Next up is this item, which is from a toy line simply called Army Gear, I think. And this was a line of military equipment that turned into other things. So this is a water canteen that turns into, I'm gonna set it up, hold on, a tiny aircraft carrier. I had a lot of people comment asking about this line of toys, this military equipment stuff that turned into play sets, and nobody seemed to remember the name of the line, myself included. I had to do a lot of digging to find out what the name of it was before I could track this down. I really wish I had more of these guys, but alas, I only have this one. Back in the late 80s, McDonald's put out a line of transforming robots whose alt mode was food. And then we have Robo Force from 1984 by Ideal Toys. A line of battling good and bad robots. They had a couple vehicles and a play set. And the interesting thing about these figures and the way they look is that they took cues from actual robot designs back in the 80s. They're kind of grounded in reality in a weird way. Gimmicks were suction cups on the bottom and this grabby arm thing. Then we have their play set, the Fortress of Steel. I'm missing a lot of pieces, but it definitely checks all the boxes for an 80s playset. Hopefully, maybe something here sparked a memory. If not, no worries, check back. I'll find something. Part 3 of Misfit Toys of the 80s. These are things that I feel might be vaguely familiar to you, but who knows, for some people these might be much more special. First up, we have Bone Age by Kenner. This was a very short-lived toy line back in 1987. These are really cool, though. These are dinosaurs that are kind of modular, like you build them, you put them together, but they also have alt mode. You can take all these pieces apart, reconfigure them, and form other things. Next up, we have Zoids by Tomy, which were robotic creatures that you actually had to put together, like from scratch. These were almost like model kits, even though they had battery-operated functions or wind-up functions. And they were kind of like giant robotic mech suits for pilots. They had these teeny tiny gold chrome pilots that fit in them. Computer Warriors by Mattel in 1989. The short version of the story behind these is miniature good guys and miniature bad guys that hide inside everyday items, just like this Pepsi can. Just having a retro looking Pepsi can is cool enough. This isn't an action figure line per se, but it did have figures that I loved to collect when I was younger. This is Spinjas, and they had these little tiny tops that did battle. Next up we have Jace and the Wheeled Warriors, a toy line made by Mattel in 1985 that was complemented by a full 65 episode season of the cartoon. The bad guys in the cartoon were actually plant-based. And they were called Monster Minds. I don't have the figures that go in them, but it's just like literally like a little plastic weird brain thing that fits in them. The very cool thing about these figures is how interchangeable all the parts are. There are tons of different kinds of wheels and weapons and axles, and you can kind of configure them any way you want, and you can sort of make new vehicles. Lastly, we have Starcom. This was a line of toys put out by Coleco in collaboration with NASA, actually, back in 1986. And it also had a 13-episode cartoon. The vehicles had a lot of moving parts and a lot of wind-up features, but the selling gimmick of these toys was magnets on the bottom of the feet of the figures and kind of all along the vehicles as well. I've always been interested in Starcom and Jace and the Wheeled Warriors figures, but never had any. It wasn't until I started reading your guys' comments asking about both those toy lines that I decided to pull the trigger and finally get some of that stuff. So thank you guys for showing an interest, and keep the comments coming. Part 4 of Misfit Toys of the 80s. These are not the toys that made center stage in our childhood, but maybe one or two of these figures were out on the periphery. And I'll start with the controversial addition to this video, because I know a lot of people are really partial to Visionaries. While they aren't super obscure outliers in the world of 80s toys, they never really got enough of a foothold to be one of the major players. I feel like a lot of people had one or two of these guys, but I didn't have any friends that were just hardcore collecting Visionaries. For those people who were growing up with them, please don't take offense to that. I just feel like in general, these guys were nowhere near as popular as some of the other lines back then. That being said, I do have fond memories of Visionary figures. I never played with them as Visionaries, though. I always used them playing along with other toys, and they were always the bad guys. But I do think the line deserves its own video, so I promise once I get some more complete figures, get the helmets for these guys, I will be doing a video devoted just to them. This terrifying guy is from Infaceables, which is a line of figures from Galoob in 1984 that had a gimmick where a rubbery human face would be vacuum sucked in to reveal like a creature or a monster face underneath. Over time with these figures, the rubber faces deteriorated and fell off, revealing like the shape of the monster face underneath, and that's why mine looks like this. Nightmare fuel. Back in the 80s, the Imperial Toy Company kind of cornered the market for really cheap plastic dinosaurs and monsters. I feel like it's almost safe to say that everybody played with one of these style plastic toys at some point in their childhood. These are the things that you would get at 5 and dime stores. Ironically, I think some of these guys are considered toxic because of the amount of lead found in the paint used to paint them. In particular, I know this guy is not very safe. Next up, we have Black Star from Galoob in 1981, which is a clear major precursor to Masters of the Universe, with less refined sculpting, no dynamic poses, but nonetheless, some colorful creative figures with some cool features. And speaking of Masters of the Universe, that brings us to the Remco Company, who are the undisputed kings of ripping off Motu. They had several lines geared toward capitalizing on the He-Man craze. This one was from Warrior Beasts, I think his name was Guana, and this is Hercules from Warlord. As always, thank you everybody for watching, and hopefully I triggered a memory or two. Part 5 of Misfit Toys of the 80s. Again, Misfit might be the wrong word because I know every toy line was someone's favorite, but in a general sense, these are the toys that played second fiddle to the big boys like Masters of the Universe, Transformers, and G.I. Joe. Food Fighters from Mattel in 1988, anthropomorphic junk food warriors that fight each other. Thumb Wrestlers by LJN in 1985. I remember these being crazy popular for a short period of time. We got a Rambo toy line back in the 80s from Coleco, an ultra-violent action trilogy from the 80s. But obviously, who am I kidding? We were never going to get out of the 80s without seeing some Rambo figures. Sectars from 1985, also by Coleco. Humanoid insects with their giant bug buddies here. I never was the biggest fan of Sectars, but now as an adult collector, I am really on the hunt for one of the larger items for this line. It's a dragonfly or a tarantula that the Sectars ride on top of, and the way you operate it is that your hand just fits into it, so you wear the creature kind of like a glove. Kenner put out this really nice version of Kit from Knight Rider in 1982. Complete with Michael Knight here. Sadly, this wasn't the beginning of like a line of Knight Rider toys. It was really kind of just this main item, but nonetheless, this is one of my favorite toys as a kid. The car did actually speak. It had Kit's voice that actually played via a little record that was kept inside. This one doesn't work, unfortunately. Centurions by Kenner in 1987, and I will do a more comprehensive video on this line once I have a few more pieces. My Jake Rockwell is in the mail right now being sent to me. This was a line of 7.5-inch figures with, obviously you can see all these modular ports, so you could configure the weapons, the missiles, the armor any way you want. This is Ace McCloud, that's Max Ray. I will forever remember those names because they're amazing. And lastly, we're looking at Sky Commanders by Kenner in 87 or 88. Backstory is good guys versus bad guys on a very unstable planet. So they had to sort of fight each other and get around in a very niche way. That's it for this one. More to come.